All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the fascinating science of progressive overload. Now, if you've ever hit the gym, you've probably heard the incredibly simple advice to just add weight to the bar. But as we'll see today, the actual biological reality of getting stronger and building muscle goes far, far beyond that basic idea. Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll hit the linear progress myth, the science of adaptation, why form beats weight, the overload toolbox, mastering reps in reserve, and we'll wrap it all up with managing the long game. Okay, kicking things off with Section 1, the linear progress myth. Let's start by shattering one of the oldest illusions in fitness. So, why do we suddenly stop making gains? We've absolutely all been there, right? You start a brand new routine, you're crushing it, making incredible progress every single week, and then, boom, nothing. You hit this universal wall. It's incredibly frustrating when your hard work just stops translating into results. But here's the secret. This isn't a failure on your part. It's literally just biology doing its job. You know, a lot of this misunderstanding actually traces back to ancient legends. Take the famous story of Milo of Croton. The legend says Milo carried a baby calf on his shoulders every single day, and as the calf slowly grew into a massive bull, Milo's strength grew perfectly along with it. It's a fun story, but unless that calf was filled with helium, it's pretty ridiculous. Unfortunately, myths exactly like this one have completely tricked us into believing that physical progression is this perfectly straight, predictable line. Let's just look at the math for a second to see why this myth completely falls apart. If we could linearly add just 5 pounds to our lifts every single week, we'd be lifting an extra 260 pounds by the end of the year. Physiologically, no way. That is entirely impossible. No human being adds hundreds of pounds to a lift in a single year. The reality is that our bodies just do not adapt in a straight line. And if you look at a chart of actual biological adaptation over a year, you'll see it looks way more like a winding road full of random waves, spikes, and total stalls. Even if you have a flawless diet, perfect sleep, and the most ideal training program on Earth, progress is just messy. Over the long haul, yes, the trend goes up. But week to week, your body is going to adapt in unpredictable ways. Which brings us to Section 2, the science of adaptation. To actually outsmart our own biology and keep that long-term trend moving upward, we really have to understand what's happening at a cellular level when we lift. This brings us to a core concept called supercompensation. And here is a totally mind-bending fact for you. Your muscles do not actually grow while you're lifting. Nope. The workout itself actually causes microscopic damage to your muscle fibers. The real growth, that supercompensation effect, happens entirely during your recovery. You stress the body, you recover, and then the body builds slightly more capacity so we can handle that exact stress the next time. So here's how this actually builds at the cellular level. When you lift, mechanical tension activates these things called mechanoreceptors. Think of them as tiny little sensors in your muscle fibers. They release growth factors, which then signal dormant satellite cells to basically wake up, repair the microscopic damage, and increase your capacity for muscle protein synthesis. But here is exactly why those plateaus happen. It's something called the repeated bout effect. Basically, your nervous system and your muscles get highly efficient at handling a familiar stress. So to keep growing, we literally have to systematically introduce new, unfamiliar demands. All right, moving right into Section 3, form before weight. Before we even talk about exactly how to add that new stress, we absolutely have to establish the golden rule of strength training. Progressive overload means exactly 0 if your technical execution breaks down. Just think about the difference between flawless lunge mechanics and perfectly locked out hip thrusts versus just moving weight from A to B. Look, if you add 10 pounds to the bar, but you cut your range of motion in half, or you start bouncing the weight and using momentum, well, you haven't actually gotten stronger, you've just gotten sloppier. Standardized technique is absolutely mandatory. And remember, we all have a totally unique starting point on what experts call the regression-progression continuum. It's based entirely on your individual biomechanics, your limb length, and your past experience. So maybe you need to start with bodyweight box squats, or maybe you're ready to jump straight into heavy barbell deadlifts. The key takeaway? You absolutely have to master your own body weight and your own ideal form before you ever start worrying about the load. Now for the fun part, Section 4, the overload toolbox. Once your technique is standardized and locked in, it is time to open up your toolbox and look at the myriad of ways we can actually force that cellular adaptation we talked about earlier. Adding weight is the standard go-to method, sure, but it is just one tool.
You can progress by increasing your volume, like doing an extra rep or adding another set. You can increase density by being super strict and cutting your rest periods down from 90 seconds to 75 seconds. You could increase your range of motion, or even just strictly slow down your tempo to increase your time under tension. All of these methods literally force your body to adapt without you necessarily ever touching heavier weights. Another really fascinating tool is micro-loading. Sometimes jumping up by those traditional 5-pound increments is just way too much, especially for smaller muscle groups or if you're dealing with unilateral imbalances. But by utilizing tiny 1-pound fractional plates, you can make these super precise load adjustments of less than 5%. This safely bypasses your nervous system's guarding reflexes. It's exactly like gently tuning a piano string, right? You want to turn the pin barely enough to correct the pitch, rather than wrenching it violently and risking a snapped string, or in our case, an injury. And when you are actually ready to manipulate volume and weight, the double progression method is just a phenomenal, self-regulating strategy. Here's how it works. You pick a target rep range, let's say 8 to 12 reps. You stick with the exact same weight, and your only goal is to add reps each session. Once you can comfortably hit the top of that range, so 12 reps for all your sets, only then do you increase the load by 5 to 10%. Then, you drop back down to the bottom of the rep range, those 8 reps, and start climbing all over again. It seamlessly blends volume and weight increases, and it never forces you to lift heavier before your tissues are truly ready. Okay, let's level up. Section 5. Mastering reps in reserve. For the intermediate and advanced lifters out there, simply tracking your weight and reps isn't quite enough anymore. We need intelligent autoregulation to make sure we're pushing hard enough, but also actively avoiding overtraining. And that brings us to reps in reserve, or RIR. Basically, this metric tracks how many more reps you realistically could have done before hitting absolute muscle failure. If your goal is hypertrophy, so muscle growth, you really thrive on a moderate 2 to 4 RIR. You're intentionally leaving a few reps in the tank. But if you're chasing true, pure strength, you're going to require a much heavier 1 to 2 RIR to really recruit those largest, most powerful muscle fibers. But when it comes to muscle growth, there is a magic number, and that number is 5. Ultimately, it doesn't matter whether you're doing incredibly heavy sets of 3 or much lighter sets of 30. It is those final 5 heavy, slow, grinding reps executed near failure, where you can literally feel the velocity of the bar dropping down, that dictate the maximum hypertrophic response. Those last 5 reps, that is where the adaptation actually happens. Finally, wrapping up with Section 6, managing the long game. Look, progressive overload is not a sprint. It's a lifelong marathon that requires expertly managing accumulated fatigue over months and even years. The most crucial point is knowing exactly when to pull back. If you start experiencing certain physiological and psychological indicators, like your strength is visibly declining for 2 or 3 consecutive sessions, your joints are constantly aching, your resting heart rate spikes, or you suddenly just dread the idea of going to the gym, listen up. You are accumulating systemic fatigue. When this happens, it is absolutely essential to take a deload week. You purposely slash your training volume by 40 to 50%. Why? To finally allow your body to fully supercompensate. And honestly, even beyond a standard deload week, the most seasoned experts recommend a full yearly reset. Once a year, just take a huge step back to reset your baseline. Throw your ego completely out the window, forget about your personal records for a minute, and focus entirely on executing the absolute best possible form through a full range of motion. Use that new standard of perfection as your brand new starting line. We've covered a ton of ground today. You now understand the actual science of nonlinear adaptation, the power of double progression, the elegance of microloading, and the nuance of reps in reserve. So it's time to put all of this into practice. The linear myth is officially dead. Now you have to ask yourself, what specific variable will you manipulate to outsmart your own biology the very next time you step into the gym?